So, in part four, let's cover a brief overview of some of the most common digestive issues, accompanying symptoms, and treatment options. Truthfully, most people should focus on the steps that I outlined in parts one through three and really shouldn't even listen to this module. Those tips outlined in part three should be really mastered first. But remember, there's nothing wrong with you. With low energy production, the weakest link will be impacted, and that is commonly somewhere along the digestive tract. Focusing on raising metabolic rate and body temperatures plus pooping every single day are the two biggest levers that will finally fix gut health once and for all. When the body is working as intended, gut health will improve. But let's cover some specific digestive states in this module, why they originated, energy metabolism, and then some specific items to try to help the situation. So, we're going to talk about GERD, IBS, general dysbiosis, leaky gut, SIFO, so fungal overgrowth, candida, and SIBO. But before we dive in, healthcare disclaimer, these treatment protocols are not intended as medical advice and are best used with the guidance of a healthcare professional. It is meant for informational purposes only. Please ask your doctor if this protocol is appropriate for your condition before starting. All right, it is important to keep in mind that these digestive issues, candida, SIBO, dysbiosis, leaky gut, they're not your root cause. What's causing the SIBO? What caused the leaky gut? Why do you have GERD? The digestive issue may be why you are experiencing symptoms, but it's not the root cause. A lot of these conditions are interrelated, resulting from a common theme. There is some energy imbalance in the digestive system, low energy availability, and problems are expressed at the weakest link. Truthfully, a lot of these symptoms will be resolved with improving metabolic rate and thyroid health and lowering stress. However, when dealing with some of these conditions for a long period of time, there's always some nuance and context. I'm not discrediting these issues, and I'm not saying that they don't come with symptoms and conditions. It's just important to reframe our mindset when we want to fix the root cause. Now we will walk through each one, define some of the symptoms, some of the reasons why they're happening, and provide you with some healing tools and more information to empower you as you work on resolving these issues once and for all. So, first, GERD. Gastrointestinal reflux disease, GERD, is when the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes and fails to keep contents within the stomach. So, a person with GERD will often experience regurgitation after consuming a meal. Symptoms may also include frequent swallowing and discomfort in the upper digestive tract, like heartburn. The mainstream idea that this is a result of eating acidic foods, but this idea fuels purchases of pharmaceutical drugs to be able to sell drugs targeting this mechanism. But GERD is caused by inflammation, not stomach acid. One study found that the esophageal damage in GERD is not the result of the burn effect produced from acid regurgitating back into the esophagus, but instead the damage results from an inflammatory reaction involving cytokines, proteins involved in cell signaling for inflammation responses. So, what is causing the stomach acid to go back up? GERD is likely a result of metabolic dysregulation, which is primarily driven by hormonal balances like low thyroid hormone, high cortisol, and high estrogen, which commonly all go hand in hand. As a reminder, hypothyroidism is a low energy state which impairs tissue structure, which then thus negatively impacts proper function of that tissue. High cortisol from hypothyroidism weakens muscles, including the ones lining the esophagus. A systemic hormonal imbalance state also commonly involves estrogen dominance. One study found that estrogen dominance is a cause of GERD and found that progesterone is actually protective. Another causative factor for GERD is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which we will discuss in a few slides. But this all implies that GERD has metabolic origins. So, working on improving the systemic hormonal state of the body and improving energy production will resolve the issues over time. Commonly prescribed PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, are just suppressing symptoms and aren't addressing the root cause. Better treatment options would include incorporating things like a lot more glycine or gelatin in the diet, consuming caffeine, potentially some aspirin since it can increase stomach acid, addressing thyroid system production, lowering protein and fat intake, and increasing carbohydrates, and of course, avoiding PUFAs. While working on improving energy production of the body as a whole, which can take some time, try to minimize consumption of foods that are causing you problems. You could also try consuming some digestive enzymes to see if a lack of stomach enzymes in your digestive tract is causing the problem. since low thyroid function lowers gastric juices and slows down peristalsis. Next up, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And this is just a set of symptoms including bloating, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and/or constipation. So it's just a broad classification for digestive issues. But many people with IBS actually test positive for SIBO. So in a meta-analysis of major IBS studies, 50 to 70% of IBS patients had SIBO when they went back through the data. One of the leading doctors in the SIBO space, Dr. Mark Pimentel, found SIBO is an underlying reason for 78% of his IBS patient symptoms. And again, SIBO will be discussed in a few slides. But elevated serotonin is likely the culprit of IBS from excess gut irritation. So here's a quote from Dr. Ray P. Quote, irritable bowel syndrome, another kind of movement disorder, can be treated effectively with anti-serotonin agents. This syndrome is very common in women with premenstrual exacerbations when estrogen is highest, end quote. So most of the serotonin in the body is in the gut, as it induces gut contractions to keep things moving through. If the gut gets irritated, it releases extra serotonin, causing more rapid movement and often diarrhea. This is to get irritants, which may be toxic, out of the body more quickly. But if the gut becomes inflamed, there may be chronic irritation and therefore chronic excess serotonin and therefore chronic diarrhea. We don't want more serotonin. So one way to help mitigate this is to, of course, work on overall gut health and address potential SIBO, but we should also lower serotonin in the meantime. Something that can help with this would be cyproheptadine, and it can help break this serotonin cycle. So you can start with 1 to 2 drops per day and increase to 4 to 5 after you gauge tolerance. This can also be used occasionally as a maintenance to keep serotonin levels under control. We like the cyproheptadine from Idea Labs made by our friend Georgie Dinkov. Next up, IBD. So IBD involves more severe symptoms and refers to chronic inflammatory conditions, which can typically present itself in 2 different forms, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So serum nitric oxide is higher in those with IBD, and excess nitric oxide is metabolic poison. So ulcerative colitis in particular can be characterized by elevated hydrogen peroxide. And the main cause of excess hydrogen peroxide in the gut is mitochondrial electron leakage from reductive stress. Again, just showing metabolic origins for all of these conditions. So this state can be caused by a low metabolism and or high PUFA consumption, as PUFAs have been shown to be a causative agent of ulcerative colitis, likely due to their toxic metabolic byproducts in DNA damage when consumed in excess. So, some options to help with IBS and IBD outside of just improving metabolism and systemic thyroid system, these include methylene blue, which has some antibacterial and antifungal benefits, but its main benefit for IBD is reducing nitric oxide levels, which we do not want high levels of. Second would be aspirin, as much of the inflammation in these conditions is driven by eicosanoids, which aspirin inhibits, but I would try methylene blue first. Third, activated charcoal in between meals, which can help bind undigested particles and compounds that are just contributing to the inflammation cycle. Vitamin B1, thiamine, which has been shown to improve energy levels with IBD. And the last thing to try would be glycine supplementation, which can be protective from inflammatory cytokines. So I would try one of these at a time, gauging tolerance, seeing if it improves symptoms, and adding a few more over time. You don't have to do all of them. Next up, let's discuss dysbiosis. Remember, there is no sterility in the body. We are one with microbes. But an event or bodily states can lead to situations where certain species can take over and cause imbalances. So dysbiosis refers to an overgrowth of either yeast or unwanted bacteria in the large intestine. However, if you have SIBO, which we'll discuss here shortly, the bacteria in the small intestine are eating food that's supposed to feed bacteria in the colon. So the bacteria in the colon can actually starve. So you really won't fix dysbiosis until you address SIBO. But dysbiosis usually refers to having a lack of commensal species. So this is good bacteria that carry out important tasks for us, like making B vitamins, keeping the pathogenic species in check, and feeding our gut lining cells through fermentation of fiber, producing short chain fatty acids. So when you have dysbiosis, you don't have as much of these commensal species. Sometimes these commensal bacteria can be completely absent or too low in count, allowing high numbers of pathogenic bacteria, yeast, or parasites to thrive. But essentially, it just means an unbalanced ecosystem in our guts. As we discussed in a previous gut health module, when reviewing the colon and the microbiome sections, the inside of the colon should be a low oxygen environment. And this environment condition helps maintain the proper balance between the obligate anaerobes and the facultative anaerobes to maintain a balanced microbiome, as many beneficial microbes are unable to survive in the presence of oxygen. So, when our colon has a high oxygen environment, which is caused by a low energy availability state, the beneficial obligate anaerobes can die out. They stop fermenting fiber into short chain fatty acids like butyrate. The colonocytes, the cells that line our guts, they lose their main energy source. The colon slows down. The backed up colon now is dominated by facultative anaerobes, and the environment is more oxygen rich, creating a negative cycle since the obligate anaerobes can't survive in this environment. We want a higher CO2 environment, which is only possible with a strong metabolic rate. So, common causes of dysbiosis include chronic stress and low metabolic rates, leaky guts, which we'll get to next, excessive antibiotic use, especially when growing up, slow transit time, as food that can sit along the digestive tract longer than normal can rot, some prescription medications, low stomach acid and low bile flow from low energy production, aka hypothyroidism, poor food choices, and sometimes long periods of mold and biotoxin exposure and excessive levels of environmental pollutants. But just focusing on the kill with, for example, antibiotics won't solve the root cause. If you get rid of the bad guys, dysbiosis will just return if you don't address the systemic state that led to the dysbiosis in the first place. Again, we return back to how can we improve the internal state of the body, the internal environment inside the gut. You can technically do a stool test to see if you have an imbalance. You can then look up if the overgrowth bacteria species are facultative anaerobes, what we want less of. But that would just tell you what you already know. You have dysbiosis. You can also try a probiotic, which we discuss more in depth at the end of this module. But truly, the focus should be on improving energy production and metabolic health, which will help give your gut the energy it needs to repair the structure and thus function better. So, along the same lines, leaky gut, because leaky gut will often lead to dysbiosis. So, in a healthy gut, the lining has selective permeability. So, those problematic endotoxin molecules and larger food particles largely stay in the gut where they're supposed to and are broken down. But with impaired intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, and an overgrowth of gram negative bacteria, inflammatory endotoxins can leach directly into the bloodstream, called endotoxemia. And this can overburden the liver, hinder our cells' ability to generate energy, lead to hormonal imbalances, and can lead to the development of several chronic inflammatory conditions. Dysbiosis and leaky gut commonly happen together, as I mentioned, as gut dysbiosis is associated with increased intestinal permeability. Here's a quote from the literature. Quote, most patients have the wrong bacteria in their gut and or gut permeability control has been lost. This results in unhealthy metabolites, toxins, from gut bacteria entering into circulation. In fact, research has shown that up to 1/3 of the small molecules in the blood come from bacteria in the gut. Worse, however, is when a patient has overgrowth of particularly unhealthy bacteria, especially gram negative. The absorbed LPS, aka endotoxins, are highly toxic with blood levels correlating with many chronic diseases, end quote. So if you've got a ton of, quote, bad bacteria and then leaky gut allowing the byproducts of bad bacteria called endotoxins leach into the bloodstream, that can cause a lot of systemic problems. Elevated endotoxin levels put an additional burden on our livers since the liver is the main organ that clears toxins like endotoxins. And when the liver is overloaded with endotoxin breakdown, it will slow down blood sugar regulation, thyroid hormone conversion, estrogen detox, amongst the 500 plus other tasks that the liver has to do every day. So, meaning you will not be functioning at your best. Here's a quote from Dr. Ray Peat, quote, bacterial endotoxin is usually the basic problem causing hormonal imbalance by being a chronic burden for the liver, keeping it from storing enough sugar to process thyroid and the other hormones effectively, end quote. So a healthy intestinal barrier and liver normally prevent the absorption of endotoxins. Endotoxemia, so the release of endotoxins from a leaky gut, can increase susceptibility to autoimmune conditions due to the absorption of pathogens and toxins into tissues and the bloodstream. It can lead to elevated stress hormones and can lower the production of sex hormones for males and females. It can also be one of the causes of non alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. Unfortunately, endotoxin release can also increase intestinal permeability, making the state worse, a negative spiral. Elevated endotoxin can damage mitochondria and hinder energy production. It can lower thyroid hormone. Elevated endotoxin can increase neuroinflammation, leading to some subclinical cognitive impairment known as brain fog. But at clinical severity, this neuroinflammation becomes neurodegenerative, as in dementia, multiple sclerosis, or Parkinson's disease. And it can lead to chronic low-grade systemic inflammation, which is associated with obesity and a key factor in developing type 2 diabetes. So clearly, leaky gut can lead to a lot of systemic problems, and we really need good energy availability to be able to maintain a well-functioning gut lining. So this is an important image from a research paper. When the cells along the gut lining shift how they produce energy, so they shift from oxidative phosphorylation to instead glycolysis, from producing carbon dioxide to producing lactic acid, this involves a global change in how those cells function, away from specialized differentiated functioning towards more defensive and inflammatory processes. Again, just showing how energy metabolism, how the cells along your gut lining produce energy, impacts the environment and how they function. With more glycolysis and less oxidative phosphorylation, less oxygen is used up, creating a more oxygen rich environment in the gut, which will drive dysbiosis and lead to the growth of facultative bacteria and less of the beneficial bacteria. So, when a gut lining cell is in an inflamed or overstimulated or fatigued state, its cytoplasmic contents can leak out. In this state, the barrier function is weakened and external material can leak in. In addition to, of course, food particles and endotoxins leaking out. So, this change in the internal environment encourages the growth of oxygen loving microbes. So, why does this happen? Why does a gut get leaky? The gut lining is made up of these epithelial cells, colonocytes, and so a well functioning lining requires cells with a solid structure. And a common theme in our course is that the maintenance of structure and function requires good energy production. So, the internal environment inside of us, which is determined by energy production, impacts its function. If our intestinal cells lack energy, they can't function properly and cannot maintain structure. And since intestinal cells consume at least 20% of the ATP we synthesize daily, any sizable drop in systemic ATP production due to low metabolic rate results in massive dysfunction in the structure and function of these cells. So, when the cells along the gut lining start falling apart, this leads to poor functioning of the gut lining. And dysfunctional intestinal cells will also release less of the final enzymes that are required to break down food for digestion. And food particles can then sit in the intestine and serve as food for microorganisms and can rot, leading to a negative spiral. Here's a quote from Dr. Ray Peat, quote, "When a cell is inflamed or overstimulated or fatigued, its cytoplasmic contents can leak out. In that state, its barrier function is weakened and external material can leak in." So I'm spending so much time on this leaky gut section because I think that a lot of people struggle with this and is a main cause of their gut problems, because in a low energy availability state, the functioning of the gut lining just isn't working as it's supposed to. But in addition to adequate energy production, the following items can actually loosen up cellular structure and decrease gut barrier integrity when in excess. So that would be heavy metals, PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, radiation, estrogen and estrogenic substances, emulsifiers, surfactants, and toxins. So we got to be really mindful of the chemicals that we use in our home and are regularly exposed to for cleaning. For example, one study showed that many commercial dishwasher detergents can destroy the gut lining. And lastly, alcohol, which has been shown to cause energetic deficiency in the gut lining cells when consumed in excess. So, how to know if you have leaky gut? Well, two big red flags would be, first, food sensitivities, because nutrients can leach into the bloodstream before they're fully broken down and digested. And second would be elevated autoimmune markers on blood work with a compromised gut lining. Bacteria and endotoxin originating from our gut can travel to other organs and trigger an autoimmune response. Some researchers are actually now saying that all autoimmune conditions may be caused by a chronic low grade infection stemming from gut bacteria that has translocated from the gut to the liver and bloodstream due to compromised gut barriers. So, how do you fix a leaky gut? Well, to truly fix it once and for all, you do have to improve energy production. This is a must, as gut lining cells that have more energy will better maintain their structure. So, the goal should be to raise your metabolic rate and increase body temperatures using the tools we outline in this course. This will also involve lowering stress in your life whenever you can, and you may have to stop the inflammation cycle and reduce consumption of unique trigger foods for you temporarily so that your body has a chance to heal. Now, what are some specific dietary factors that can help strengthen the gut barrier? Well, carbohydrate consumption, since it leads to more systemic energy production, and carbohydrates also give us some fiber. And so we want to make sure that we are still consuming fiber in food, not necessarily excess supplements, and making sure that we know what fibers are working well for us and consume those fibers regularly to help increase intestinal butyrate and short chain fatty acid production. Good microbes in our gut take the fiber from our diets and make short chain fatty acids for us, which then serve as a fuel source for the gut lining cells. And the more short chain fatty acids we have in our gut, this serves as an environmental trigger to perform proper energy production, beta oxidation, instead of glycolysis. And a diet void of fiber can lead to less short chain fatty acid production by gut bacteria, which has been shown to increase gut leakiness, likely because the gut lining cells don't have an energy source. Now, you don't have to go overboard with fiber, but I don't want us to avoid fiber entirely, as we still want some short chain fatty acid production from fiber fermentation from those good microbes. Now, you can also consume butter in reasonable amounts, moderate amounts, because butter contains a short chain fatty acid called butyrate, which can increase the short chain fatty acid level inside of our gut. We also want to make sure we're consuming bone broth for those specific amino acids like glycine. Another thing you could try either with food or a colostrum supplement would be colostrum. And this has been shown in studies to reduce intestinal permeability, likely because it's rich in lactoferrin, which can bind to and reduce endotoxin levels and inflammation. Lactoferrin is high in raw milk and raw dairy products, more so than pasteurized products, but it is very elevated in colostrum with some estimates of 7 times higher concentrations. And then raw dairy in general, as it's tolerated, can serve as a natural probiotic containing butyrate producing bacterial species, which would then increase the level of butyrate producing bacteria in the gut. Some specific supplements, sunlight. I know many people don't think of that as a sunlight, but sunlight is going to allow us to increase vitamin D3 levels. We want to make sure that our vitamin D3 remains elevated so that our gut can function as it's supposed to, giving our body the tools it needs. And so you can use a vitamin D3 supplement if you do not have enough sunlight access, like in the winter. Other things to try would be niacinamide. So this would be about try 200 to 300 milligrams per day for a period of time to see how it works out for you. And activated charcoal or zeolite, gauging tolerance. Again, don't try niacinamide and activated charcoal or niacinamide or activated charcoal or zeolite at the same time. Definitely isolate them and try them out separately. But in a clinical trial of endurance athletes, 12 weeks of daily zeolite supplementation of just 1 to 2 grams per day tightened the intestinal wall. And it likely did this by reducing the level of inflammatory molecules in the gut. Because as general inflammation can trigger the colonocytes to perform glycolysis instead of the ideal beta oxidation, which then hinders energy production, metabolism, and thus lowers the function of the gut lining. So that's what I mentioned earlier about the tips. We've got to stop the inflammation cycle because that inflammation cycle can keep us in this negative spiral. So doing what we can to really make sure we're eating enough foods that are working well for us right now. All right, now let's transition to SIFO or Candida. So basically, fungal infections. So SIFO, SIFO, stands for small intestinal fungal overgrowth, and Candida refers to a fungal overgrowth caused by a yeast called Candida. Common symptoms include digestive issues like food sensitivities and constant histamine intolerances, as the body commonly releases histamines in high concentrations to try to kill the fungus. This can also, these digestive symptoms can also include more bloat after eating like yeast, so commercial baked goods where yeast is used. Other symptoms include infections on the skin, nails, and mouth, and the overgrowth can negatively impact energy, mood, and memory. So things you may see would be like a lot of skin rashes, vaginal or jock itches, recurring genital or vaginal infections and UTIs. Those just keep coming back and back. A whitish, yellowish coating on the tongue. And so when discussing candida and fungal overgrowths, it's important to keep in mind that candida is not the problem. The real problem is the terrain inside of us that's created an ideal environment for candida overgrowth to take over. Candida is the most common human fungal pathogen and is actually a normal part of the gastrointestinal flora. It normally colonizes the oral, genital, and intestinal mucosa of most healthy individuals and is a part of the normal flora with no harmful effects. Surprisingly enough, we actually want happy, nourished candida in our guts. When our candida is happy and healthy, it will live in our gut, helping us with digestion without causing any negative symptoms. However, when in excess, candida can overtake populations of beneficial bacteria and produce significant amounts of acetaldehyde, ACH, by alcohol fermentation from glucose. So, this ACH is a toxic metabolic byproduct of the candida species that is upregulated with candida overgrowths. Candida overgrowths can drive a lot of inflammation via cytokines, chemokines, enzymes, etc., and in turn, inflammation helps promote the growth and spread of candida. Histamine plays a role in our body's inflammatory response, so increased levels of inflammation will lead to a higher production of histamines. Plus, the increased levels of ACH itself will also cause an increase in histamine release, creating negative spirals. But the real damage done by candida is to the intestinal epithelial barrier, the gut lining, since the aldehyde secretion causes the epithelial cells of the small intestines to shrink, contributing to leaky gut. And remember, a damaged gut lining can be the reason for a wide variety of food sensitivities. The yeast can then also migrate to other tissues, for example, yeast infection, vaginal or jock itches, and skin and nail infections. Now, many people think that they have a systemic candida overgrowth that ventures into the bloodstream, but this is actually very, very rare and would be detected through blood culture. You would also likely be very near death. So don't worry, your candida is not beyond the point of repair and you can get it in check. Some practitioners believe that candida is actually very hard to test for and that the best way to determine if you have a candida overgrowth is just symptom analysis and then testing if some antifungal treatments help in parallel with working on fixing digestion and thyroid function. Stool tests, however, are very unreliable for indicating a candida overgrowth since most people have benign candida in their guts. So, stool tests will only give data for what's in your large intestine, not necessarily in your small intestine or stomach. So, for candida overgrowths, symptom evaluation may be the best way and most cost effective way to assess. So, when it comes to how we get this overgrowth under control, the real question we want to ask is why is candida overgrowing in the first place when it should be kept in control by a balanced body? Well, when you couple stress and poor immune function with the slow metabolism, and you have a surefire recipe for candida overgrowth. If your thyroid system metabolism is not functioning optimally, then your body's immune system is not functioning optimally and is unable to keep candida in check. Candida overgrowth is a symptom of an underfunctioning metabolism, otherwise known as a low energy state, just like all of these other gut conditions. So you're seeing some trends here. And so these 4 points that I have on the slide, these are characteristics, long-term results of an underfunctioning metabolism. And all of these things just increase the invasiveness and growth of candida. First, low body temperature. Fungi thrive as body temperature drops. And so we've discussed how our body temperature drops as our thyroid and metabolic function declines. And so research has found that higher body temperatures help diminish fungal pathogens. A low body temperature puts us in a compromised state that allows for candida to overgrow and take over. A high body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, on the other hand, is ideal for just naturally warding off fungi, prohibiting growth. So candida can really overgrow in low body temperature states. The second condition for a low energy availability state under functioning metabolism is high levels of estrogen, and candida thrive under high estrogen states. And unfortunately, our current environment and lifestyle choices promote estrogen overload. Numerous studies actually show that when estrogen is not present in high concentrations, cells have a natural immunity or resistance to candida. When estrogen is introduced, the candida can proliferate aggressively and can become invasive. One study showed that introducing estrogen made the candida 8.6 times more invasive. This is because candida yeasts are attracted to estrogen, and for good reason. Estradiol is a reproductive hormone for yeast like it is for humans. So yeast tend to congregate in areas that are high in estrogen. And to tie this back to a low metabolic state, individuals in a low metabolic state have a sluggish liver, which then has a difficult time detoxing excess estrogen, making this a negative cycle. The third factor of a low energy availability state is low thyroid function, as candida thrives when you are lacking some of the membrane surface antibodies like IgA, and these depend on thyroid and progesterone. IgA are the immune antibodies which act as a barrier to keep pathogens, bacteria, and candida from invading your cells. And these antibodies become deficient, so the production of these are lower as thyroid levels decline. So here's a quote from Lita Lee. She has a PhD researcher. Quote, IgA is the main type of antibody on surfaces and secretions and should protect against candidiasis. But IgA is deficient in hypothyroidism, so hypothyroid people have more susceptible membranes, and the yeast thrive on sugar that can appear in the secretions in diabetes stress. But they adhere to any cell with estradiol in it, thinking they have found a fertile yeast. Eating sugar and fruit is helpful rather than harmful, as the cultists say, because well nourished yeasts aren't harmful in the intestine. But starved yeast need sugar, and so they project invasive filaments into the intestinal wall. Eating sugar in fruits and fruit juices lowers cortisol, keeps the white cells working, helps to increase thyroid, and keeps the yeast from becoming invasive. PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, or omega 3 and omega 6 oils, are yeast stimulants, unlike saturated fats. The white film on grapes is actually a layer of yeast cells that live there because of the PUFA in the waxy surface of the grape. End quote. So Lita Lee just providing some information how keeping thyroid function up can help us just keep candida levels in check, and consuming carbohydrates is a really great way to make sure that we keep our thyroid function up, even though a lot of people in the candida space are going to tell you to stop eating carbohydrates because that will lead to short-term symptom suppression, but will lead to more invasive candida down the line, as we'll discuss a little bit more here in the next couple slides. The fourth state of a underfunctioning metabolism, low energy availability state includes high stored iron. And this is because unregulated excess iron feeds candida. Candida requires iron to sustain hyphal growth and proliferation. Many of us have excess iron stored in our bodies due to iron fortified foods, multivitamins, birth control, and iron supplementation. We also lack important nutrients like copper and retinol, which are needed to regulate iron metabolism. And high levels of stress interfere with the body's ability to recycle iron efficiently. Iron accumulation in the tissues, which is different from blood levels, creates an ideal environment for candida to feed and thrive. In fact, research has shown that giving mice the drug deferrisurux, I don't know how to pronounce it, and I'm not suggesting you use it, just showing this as an example. So research with the mice consuming this drug, and this drug lowers iron levels, actually reduced the survival rate of candida inside the mice. Again, not saying to take this drug, just showing that an increased iron load can support more candida growth. So before we get into how to actually fix candida, let's first discuss what not to do and what is commonly suggested to do, and that is to starve candida. There are a lot of aggressive approaches out there to try and treat candida overgrowth, but most of them do very little to address the root cause, which is an underfunctioning metabolism. The general idea behind most candida diets or approaches is that in order to kill the candida, you have to starve it. But after that short term kill, candida tends to come back with a vengeance. Remove carbs to starve the candida, they say. So this may lead to short term symptom suppression and some relief. But in the long run, this carb removal makes the metabolism function worse, which will then worsen the candida overgrowth and not address the low metabolic state that led to the overgrowth in the long run. Plus, as we learned from the quote from Lee to Lee, candida is part of our natural microflora. The idea that we can starve it doesn't make any sense. Having candida in your intestines is normal and safe. And keeping that candida in balanced, normal levels inside your intestines where it has a food source is the safest place to keep it. If that small population, that normal a level of candida population is fed, it won't invade other tissues and cause systemic problems throughout the body. But if you starve candida by cutting off its sugar supply, it needs glucose to survive, so it will search your body for it. Candida can then become invasive, releasing long filaments that can penetrate through your cells to look for sugar. In fact, numerous studies have shown that candida fungi are able to undergo a morphological switch, transitioning from round yeast cells to a filamentous hyphal form in response to various environmental cues, such as low glucose supply. Research shows that candida grows more in low glucose environments because it's looking for glucose. It is this morphological switch that is considered its most virulent trait and has been strongly linked to its ability to invade and damage host tissues. In 1940, a microbiologist showed that if you starve yeast cells, they become more aggressive and invasive by sending out those long branches of growth that sink into your intestinal wall looking for food. So, this starving condition can then make candida invade your tissues rather than just letting them live freely and normally in your intestine. If you take this starve and suppression route, they will likely just end up coming back over time, which is why you see so many people continuously dealing with this. Going the zero low carb approach may suppress symptoms, but often these people get to a point where they only see relief when they eat meat and zero carbs. That's not truly healing. So we have to consider whether eating no or low carbs and starving the candida is actually fixing things or just suppressing symptoms. You need to fix the underlying cause or it will just keep coming back. We can still manage symptoms while fixing the root cause, low metabolism, with a more balanced diet by prioritizing foods that are working well for you right now and making sure our thyroid and metabolic rate is up with adequate carb consumption, bioavailable protein, healthy saturated fats, and hitting our micronutrient targets. All right, here's 7 tips on how to actually fix candida. But the bottom line is that candida overgrowth is a symptom of an underworking metabolism, low energy state. So the solution is less about targeting and killing the overgrowth and more about supporting an environment, a bodily state that naturally keeps the yeast in proper balance. Focusing on our nutrition and lifestyle choices in a way that optimizes thyroid function and raises the metabolism should be the primary focus when it comes to treating the root cause of candida. Correcting thyroid, stress levels, and hormones is the only root cause way to fix this imbalance. So here are our 7 best tips to do that, which again, we cover in depth throughout the course. But these 7 tips also include ways to reduce symptoms while you are working on re-regulating thyroid and improving energy metabolism. So first, blood sugar regulation. So the extreme eating patterns with both eating frequency and meal compositions can hinder homeostasis for the body, hindering healing and energy production. So we want to make sure that we keep our blood sugar elevated and eat balanced meals or snacks every 3 to 5 hours. And this will help support your body to keep hormone levels balanced and thyroid levels up. Dipping into a low blood sugar state will make the candida situation worse. You don't need to be constantly snacking and grazing between meals. You want to leave time between meals, but also on the other end of the spectrum, you don't need to do excessive fasting. Give your body the tools it needs to generate energy at a regular frequency. The second tip would be nutrient intake. So we definitely want to ensure we're regularly including nutrient-rich foods like eggs, meat, dairy, liver, occasional oysters, because micronutrient deficiencies can hinder energy production and thus limit metabolic rate and thyroid function. One example relative to candida is retinol, the bioavailable form of vitamin A. Retinol has been shown to boost the production of IgA in the intestine, which helps your body protect the gut lining from candida species. You don't need to go overboard on retinol consumption, but just making sure that we're consuming enough of it, occasionally getting liver in our diet will definitely help here. Third is prioritize foods that agree with you. Otherwise, foods that are easy to digest for you. So you need to do whatever you can to help your system as a whole by easing digestion. Making sure our intestines are clear and our pooping daily will be super helpful while healing. So this is a common thing I talk about in these gut health modules, being aware of what foods are working for you right now and making sure that you're consuming enough of them calorie-wise. And over time, you'll be able to be less and less restrictive. Number 4, address estrogen dominance. So for women, this means ensuring a monthly bleed and ovulation. And of course, postmenopause, oral progesterone supplementation can definitely be helpful. So, oral progesterone 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, in line with your cycle, can help push estrogen out of the tissues. And for those in postmenopause, oral progesterone 3 weeks on, taking 1 week off, that cycle can really help lower stored estrogen levels. And then for lifestyle and environment side of things, we definitely want to stop using estrogenic chemicals in cleaning products and your skincare and makeup. So just being super careful with the products that you use regularly and are exposing yourself because they can be a source of estrogens. Number 5, reduce iron overload. So, one way to do this is to ensure adequate intake of copper and retinol foods, which help keep iron regulation in check. We definitely want to reduce consumption of iron fortified foods, and unfortunately conventional flour is commonly fortified with iron. And so then that means like baked goods or most food in a box or package that uses that iron fortified flour counts as well. So try to use organic non fortified flour when you are using flour or buying baked goods. Donating blood 1 to 2 times a year can also help your body reduce stored iron levels. Number 6 would be to use gentle antifungals when trying to reduce symptoms. So, gentle antifungals and supplements can help reduce symptoms and lower the candida load on the body. But you want to keep in mind that while these antifungals can help relieve symptoms in the short term, they're not going to fix the root cause. Stress reduction and metabolism support must be done in parallel. But some dental antifungals include coconut oil. So, coconut oil is a great tool since it contains caprylic acid, which is very effective against candida. And while caprylic acid is also available in supplemental form, coconut oil is just going to be your most cost effective approach. So, you can consume coconut oil in your daily diet as one of your fat sources. Definitely still factor that into your total caloric intake. The second gentle antifungal would be garlic, because garlic has some natural antifungal properties. Another food would be raw honey. Incorporating raw honey into your daily carb allotment can also be helpful, as raw honey has been shown to have antifungal activity against candida. Another option would be milk thistle tea. So one of the active ingredients in milk thistle is it's I don't know how to pronounce this. Silymar, silymarin, which has a powerful antifungal effect towards candida. And one of the properties is an anti-biofilm activity against candida, meaning it prevents the yeast from forming protective biofilm that make it so difficult to kill off. Milk thistle is also liver protective, which is important for suppressing candida as well, because our liver needs to be detoxifying estrogen to keep candida levels in check. The liver can also get overworked as it struggles to process the larger and larger amounts of ACH from candida overgrowths. And one of the other flavonoids in milk thistle, called psilocybin, well, this is directly liver protective since it reduces ACH caused liver injury. Another gentle antifungal would be flowers of sulfur. So it's one gentle tactic against fungi, and you can topically dust your skin to kill them on the surface, or you can also just take a pinch orally to suppress fungal growth inside the intestine. So you can try flowers of sulfur or precipitated sulfur, just 200 milligrams for about 3 days in a row, and you'll be able to see if it actually makes a difference. There are also sulfur soap bars that you can just rub on your skin in the shower for any skin infections. And the last antifungal I'll discuss in this section is undecilenic acid. And this would be a last resort. So if you've tried the other ones and those didn't work well for you. So undecilenic acid is an unsaturated fatty acid that's naturally found in the body, but it works by preventing candida from morphing from a yeast into a fungus. And it demonstrates some fungicidal activity as well. So studies demonstrate that it effectively inhibits biofilm production of candida. And there are also some clinical studies providing evidence that supplementation of it can help maintain a healthy balance of gastrointestinal and vaginal flora. So the brand Thorne sells a good undecilenic acid product, and it's previously named SF722. The standard dose is about 250 milligrams 2 to 3 times a day. But again, use this one as a last resort after trying the others. Now, since these antifungal supplement supports can create die-off, especially on decilenic acid, it's helpful to also include a binder like activated charcoal in between meals to help clear the die-off produced. It's also a good idea to start at a low dose and work your way up in order to allow time for your body to adapt and avoid releasing a large amount of toxins all at once. And the seventh tip would be strategic supplementation that can definitely help reduce symptoms. And so the ones that we list would help reduce symptoms without lowering metabolic rate because we want to avoid the cases where we're hurting ourselves in the long run by lowering metabolic rate. So here are three you can try. Aspirin, it's been shown to inhibit fungal growth and even kill candida. And then two others would be freeze-dried kidney and quercetin, specifically for histamine support because that commonly comes with some candida overgrowths. So freeze-dried kidney, because kidney contains the DAO enzyme, which helps break down histamine. And then quercetin, it's a flavonoid naturally found in certain plants, which has been shown to inhibit the production and release of histamines. But in summary, candida overgrowth is a consequence of low thyroid. Correcting metabolism is the only root cause way to fix the imbalance. So starving candida will just make problems worse in the long run. Restricting carbs suppresses thyroid function by increasing cortisol levels, which blocks the conversion of thyroid hormones in the liver. And a suppressed thyroid function creates an environment for candida to proliferate. Plus, starved candida yeasts are able to change their shape and become invasive to our cells and tissues in search of glucose to survive. So instead, we want to focus on eating to support blood sugar balance, consuming balanced meals at regular frequencies, eating micronutrient rich foods, improving gut health, lowering your stress levels, and ensuring you're eating enough calories for your needs. So now let's move on to SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this is characterized by an increase in the number or a change in the type of bacteria growing in the small intestine. So SIBO can be marked by overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria or beneficial bacteria, but really any overgrowth in the small intestine can become detrimental to your gastrointestinal health. Remember, the small intestine should be relatively sterile compared to the large intestine. And most of the organisms in our microbiome are in the large intestine. The small intestine normally has a relatively lower number of bacteria due to the really strong stomach acids and bile juices. Also has faster movement and those MMC cleaning waves, which keeps the small intestine relatively sterile compared to the large intestine. So SIBO often involves a wide variety of digestive symptoms depending on the type of SIBO that you have. Chronic diarrhea, constipation, chronic or frequent bloat and abdominal distension from gas, cramping, nausea, acid reflux, flatulence, and belching. So the bloating, fermentation, and overgrowth can damage parts of the digestive system, leading to food sensitivities. Another common symptom of SIBO is a bad reaction to FODMAPs, which stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which are short chain carbohydrates. Foods that contain FODMAPs are not bad foods. Just someone with SIBO can be in a state where their digestive tract may not respond well to them because they have bacterial overgrowth in areas where we shouldn't have bacterial overgrowths. So, SIBO develops as a result of, you guessed it, low energy availability, which leads to one or more of the body's natural defense mechanisms against bacterial overgrowth to become compromised. The defense mechanisms include hydrochloric acid to destroy bacteria in the stomach, gut motility to keep intestinal contents moving quickly through the digestive tract, and an intact ileocecal valve to prevent backflow of contents from the large intestine back up to the small intestine. There can also be some specific life events that kind of trigger the onset of SIBO. So, given a low energy availability state, plus adding one of these triggering events, SIBO can thrive. So, that would be like a lot of stress, round after round of antibiotics, a bout of food poisoning, chronically under eating for a long period of time, and of course, I'm going to say it again, downregulation of metabolism. When the gut is not moving as it's supposed to, food particles that should be cleared out by the cleaning waves of the MMC remain in the small intestine. The MMC is that stomach growl and rumble where most, if not all, of the contents of the digestive tract are pushed down and cleaned out. And food that isn't completely broken down and cleared out by our digestive tract can act as fuel for gut bacteria in the wrong places. So, with sluggish digestion, saccharides and fibers from undigested foods can sit longer than normal in areas that it's not supposed to be at, like the small intestine, which will feed organisms, resulting in an increase in bacterial fermentation in the small intestine. And fermentation will lead to more gas, distension, bloating. If the low energy availability state isn't corrected, the body's natural defense mechanisms that require energy will not work properly, and SIBO can easily develop. So the body's extensive system, intricate design is designed to prevent bacterial overgrowths. But when one of those are compromised, bacteria can overgrow and thrive. Now, the small intestine is narrower than the large intestine, and it's more sensitive to stretching, distension from gas, and there's really nowhere for the gas to escape. Instead, gas sits and very slowly dissipates across the small intestine lining, or it slowly moves down the gastrointestinal tract. But this increases pressure on the ileocecal valve, and this valve resides between the small and large intestine. And if this valve is frequently held open, bacteria that normally reside in the colon can climb and make their way up into the small intestine where they don't belong. And this they can feed on debris and make SIBO worse. So we want that ileocecal valve to remain closed, but it can be pushed open through just a bunch of fermentation and gas. So SIBO is basically a condition that in almost all cases is caused by poor gut motility. So the failure of the MMC to clean out your small intestine between meals, food to sit there longer, not pooping every day. So you cannot get SIBO unless you have a motility problem. Poor motility will lead to food stagnation, leading to dysbiosis or overgrowth, which will lead to increased fermentation in a location that it isn't designed to expand that much, leading to pain, bloating, and a negative cycle. So, constipation symptoms make sense, but how does diarrhea fit into this? Well, chronic loose, watery stools doesn't mean you have too much gut motility. This is the result of the byproducts created by bacteria, which are usually osmotic, meaning they can draw a lot of water into the bowel, triggering a loose stool event. In more severe cases of SIBO, there may be damage to the intestinal cells, a decrease in the production of the lactase enzyme, which is needed to break down and digest lactose, and fat malabsorption due to deconjugated bile salts, all of which may lead to diarrhea as well. There's a huge connection between the development of SIBO and MMC, migrating motor complex dysfunction, as those with SIBO and IBS have an average of half as many MMC contractions, with those contractions being roughly 30% on average compared to normal healthy controls. So, as a reminder, the MMC is muscle contractions that help move food through you quickly and also making sure to really clean up shop to make sure that food doesn't sit there. Low thyroid function disrupts MMC function, and a dysfunctional MMC may be the mechanism of how SIBO started. In the research, drugs that disrupt MMC function have been shown to cause SIBO, while restoring MMC function reduce the density of small intestinal bacterial to normal levels. Unfortunately, MMC dysfunction can increase the risk of SIBO, but getting SIBO can cause further disruptions to the MMC, slowing it down further, making it a negative spiral. And this is why restoring MMC function is a vital part of fixing SIBO. While symptoms vary, one major symptom is that you are never really hungry. You never get that stomach growl. And that growl comes from a strong and robust migrating motor complex, MMC, sweeping downwards, contracting the muscles along your digestive tract. So, if you're never really hungry or experience that growl sensation, this is a sign that you may have an overgrowth and dysfunctional MMC. What about SIBO testing? Well, many practitioners use the SIBO breath test to officially diagnose and test for SIBO, where you ingest some sort of lab made sugar source like lactulose or glucose, and then breath samples are collected at 15-minute intervals to test for gases from bacteria. I've actually done this test before, very painful to get through. However, recently there's been a lot of data showing that these tests are not accurate despite being widely used. Lactulose breath testing has been shown to be inaccurate and provide a lot of false positive tests. So you're kind of just wasting your money. The glucose breath test has also been shown to give false negatives and false positives. Plus, there's documentation that those with SIBO can react negatively to the glucose solution used for the test, where the bacteria can start to feed and ferment, making matters worse. And on top of the false positive and false negative test results, the breath test is expensive, hard to get through, and insurance doesn't cover it. So honestly, breath testing just isn't worth it. It's far from perfect. Instead, perform a symptom evaluation as you make dietary and lifestyle tweaks. So now let's discuss SIBO treatment. And you're probably thinking in your head, wow, all of these treatments sound pretty similar. And yes, it is pretty similar to what we've already discussed for various other digestive states because they're all resulting from low energy availability. But when you're in a state like this, sometimes you just have to work through some of the discomfort to get to the other side, with the main goal of increasing thyroid and metabolic rate slowly over time so that all the steps of your digestive system have the energy to function properly. Unfortunately, if you ask 10 people familiar with SIBO what a SIBO diet is, you will get 10 different answers. And the word diet is often associated with weight loss, but SIBO diets are not weight loss plans. They're part of SIBO management. They're meant to decrease symptoms in people who don't feel well while fixing the root cause. Now, I believe that SIBO treatment and SIBO diets does not involve long-term complex dietary restriction. And the approach of starving the microorganisms, just like what we talked about with Candida, it simply doesn't work. The starving approach may provide temporary relief, but the condition will return again because you didn't address the initial reason why the imbalance occurred, which is a low metabolic rate. Plus, you can never win the war against bacteria by trying to starve it. Bacteria multiply by 2 every 12 hours. So if you starve the bacteria, the stuff that grows back will be all replicas of the bacteria that is immune to starvation. This is evolution at its finest, and nature will always win. Now, the solution will involve temporarily removing trigger foods while in parallel addressing intestinal motility and metabolic rate. Constantly eating food that's triggering you can become a vicious cycle of inflammation, endotoxin, serotonin, and gut damage. It doesn't mean you'll have to avoid this food for forever, but temporarily reducing consumption can certainly reduce inflammation levels in the meantime and give the body the space it needs to heal. If gas is chronically being produced by an overgrowth of SIBO microbes in the small intestine, this can continue to place pressure on that ileocecal valve, opening it and further continuing this migration of microbes into the small intestine. So, during SIBO treatment, the goal is to try to minimize gas production through dietary tweaks. What carbs work best for you? What food choices lead to the least amount of bloating? The goal here is to identify foods that can be more fully digested and thus minimize bacterial growth. If certain foods don't agree with you right now, which will change as your gut health and thyroid health improves, avoid them for the time being. Try to select foods that provide digestive relief, but we don't want to be super restrictive with carbs or overall calorie intake, as that will not allow our metabolism and thyroid health to improve. So we have to be eating sufficient carbohydrates and calories. And if you're kind of at a state where you have no idea what to eat, you're confused and you don't even know what works well, you can try out tips and approach from Dr. Mark Pimentel. He's probably one of the leading researchers in the SIBO and IBS space, and he has the least restrictive approach for SIBO out there. So here's a column this is a chart from Dr. Mark Pimentel. And so there's different columns, easy for humans to digest, more difficult to digest, and humans cannot digest. So let's start all the way on the right side. So Dr. Mark Pimentel suggests definitely avoiding the right column. So this are things like, artificial sweeteners, sucralose, sorbitol, and then a lot of like gums, xylitol, lactulose, and many others. Then in the middle column, he lists fructose and lactose. So here it's just important to experiment to see what types of fruit and what type of dairy work for you and don't work for you. And then for carbs, all the way on the left side, prioritizing pure glucose sources and sucrose for less chance of things to ferment. So here's some more of Dr. Pimentel's tips. He suggests that many people do totally fine with white rice, sourdough bread, potatoes, maple syrup, and sugar, as these are going to be a pretty high source of glucose. Second tip would be reduce resistant starch consumption whenever possible when you have SIBO. And this is because resistant starch can be a huge food source for bacteria. Again, we just want to make sure that we're not giving the bacteria in our small intestine large food sources that can allow them to continue to proliferate in areas that they're not supposed to be. So resistant starch is going to come from, resistant starch supplements. Definitely don't do that. And rice and potatoes that are cooked and then cooled back in the fridge. So just don't consume cool potatoes and rice that are kept in the fridge. So ideally, you would cook your potatoes and rice and consume them right away, warm or hot. But if you're going to meal prep them, just making sure that you definitely reheat them, just being aware of that. His third tip would be to don't go out of your way to add fiber in supplemental form. Fourth tip, avoid beans and legumes at this point in time, as they can lead to a lot of fermentation and gas, which can make SIBO symptoms and the state worse. He says that most things grown below ground, like roots, are typically well tolerated. So again, like potatoes, beets, carrots, onions, mushrooms. Also, most things grown on a plant like peppers, cucumber, zucchini, squash. These are fruit vegetables. Those are pretty much mostly well tolerated. And then fruit tolerance will vary a lot as fiber type and ripeness will vary. So apples, peas, and pears and bananas can be constipating and slow the gut for some people. I'm not saying that these are bad at all, but these are notes that he has presented and we've seen with various others. Apples, pears, and bananas can sometimes be constipating. And so if you're eating stone fruits like pears and apples, peeling and cooking them and stewing them to help pre-break them down can definitely help. Most fruits should be totally fine, but again, gauge your tolerance to the different types of fibers and definitely avoid unripe fruit. Now, when it comes to dairy, if dairy gives you digestive problems, Dr. Mark Pimentel says that you can try adding lactase enzymes to the milk. So you can buy lactase enzyme supplement in like a dropper form, and you can add a few drops to milk. And that lactase enzyme will help to pre-break down some of that lactose. So let the milk sit in the fridge for 1 day with those enzymes added in to reduce lactose levels. But you can also just try different types of dairy. So aged cheeses are great since they're very, very low in lactose, almost containing zero lactose, and they can likely serve as one of your main calcium sources during this phase. May want to try avoiding a bunch of store-bought yogurt since it can contain added bacteria. Since motility is slow right now, those added random bacteria strains can potentially cause problems. Dr. Mark Pimentel mentions you can try making your own 24-hour yogurt at home. He has some recipes online. There's some good beneficial bacteria species that are added to these recipes. So you can look up SIBO 24-hour yogurt recipe. And that 24-hour time helps the lactose be completely broken down. Another tip he has is to avoid gum or anything with sugar alcohols. So the OL at the end of a word, for example, xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol, etc., Usually means it's a sugar alcohol. Many of these are synthetically designed not to be absorbed by humans, so they will be digested by bacteria, which can produce gas and symptoms. So definitely avoid those during this time. And then you also want to may avoid buying store-bought fermented foods, just like the yogurt conversation. A lot of random bacteria strains can be added to these products and can cause problems. So this would include kombucha, sauerkraut, and things like that. Definitely make these on your own and gauge tolerance for those. But just want to remind you, a restrictive diet doesn't fix SIBO. You must address the underlying cause of low energy availability. The goal over time is to be able to eat a wider variety of foods as we address low energy availability. We don't need long term restrictive diets. All right, let's discuss SIBO support tools. So, some must do's and then some tools that you can use. And we'll walk through each of these one by one. So, the first one, thyroid support. As we've discussed previously, a proper functioning digestive system is complex and energy intensive. So, in parallel to the tips that we discussed below, we want to make sure that we're still working on supporting thyroid health and trying to improve systemic energy production. And again, this can be monitored by body temperature and pulse measurements. We want to see those trending upwards over time. On one hand, a high bacterial load can be something that's holding you back from seeing meaningful improvements in body temps, metabolism, and thyroid health. But on the other hand, just eradicating the bacterial load through a bunch of antibiotics is not a long term solution, as relapse will be high. So, making sure we're improving energy production in parallel to SIBO treatment is vital for long term success. And we cannot improve systemic energy production when we're in a calorie deficit. So, we definitely want to be sitting at maintenance calories when we're trying to fix our gut. You shouldn't really be trying to do a fat loss phase and trying to fix major gut problems at the same time. Separate those out. So we need to avoid large calorie deficits at this point in time while prioritizing food that our body can digest and utilize well. This may be a limited set of food at one point in time when you're in a really bad SIBO or bad digestive state. That's okay, but we need to do the best we can to avoid digestive discomfort while also making sure we're providing our body with enough calories and energy. The second SIBO support will be supporting the MMC, the migrating motor complex, which we've discussed is a vital part of the digestive system that must be functioning properly to prevent SIBO. Poor gut motility and MMC issues can cause SIBO relapse after anyone takes like an eradication phase. So this MMC thing must be addressed. And so here are some tips on how best to get the MMC functioning again, in addition to, of course, addressing energy availability. So the first would be less snacking and more discrete meals. Many of the cleaning waves of the MMC happen at night while we're asleep. And for many people with a good gut health state, this will be sufficient to help maintain a healthy, balanced environment in the digestive tract. But for others that have an impaired MMC, including those with SIBO, it may be beneficial to space food more out during the day to give our MMC more chances to like do that rumble and move through the digestive tract. So more chance for it to run. You don't need to fast aggressively, and there's no data that intermittent fasting improves SIBO. Just eat discrete meals. So try to space out meals by 3 to 5 hours to give the MMC more interrupted time to operate, as constant snacking turns off the next MMC cycle. Find a structure that fits your schedule and lifestyle where you can still fit in your total calories, because again, we want to make sure that we're eating enough during this phase, but leaving at least 3 to 5 hours between eating sessions. You can still consume water, tea, or sparkling water between meals, no problem. The next tip to promote MMC function is prokinetics. So, in addition to thyroid support, herbal prokinetics are a great tool to help reestablish the MMC. We do not recommend pharmaceutical prokinetics as they can lead to a negative cycle of serotonin increase. Prokinetic agents are medications that amplify and coordinate gastrointestinal muscular contractions, thereby initiating the cleansing waves in our intestinal tracts through the MMC. Essentially, these agents help support and make sure the MMC is working to help move food waste through us to avoid bacterial overgrowths along the digestive tract. There are prescriptions that we want to avoid, but there are also natural options that serve as natural prokinetics. So these include high dose ginger, herbal bitters like dandelion root and burdock root, and an herbal formulation called iberogast. And so this is an herbal product that includes a bunch of different types of things like milk thistle, lemon balm leaf, licorice root, peppermint leaf, chamomile flower, a bunch of things. In fact, I, iberogast has been shown to be an effective prokinetic and yield similar results to the prescription agents. And not all of these options will work for everyone, so it may be useful to experiment with the different natural prokinetic supports to see what works best for you and get that MMC supported and functioning again. So you can try that iberogast product, or you can try doing a tea in between your 3 discrete meals using a natural prokinetic. So you can try a ginger root and lemon tea. Simply take a big hunk of ginger and peel off the skin, chop into cubes, and then add to a pot of filtered water with half a lemon, and then boil that water for 5 to 10 minutes and sip on that tea between meals. And the third way to support the MMC is to, like we've already brought up, like Dr. Pimentel suggested, reduce the consumption of artificial sweeteners, including stevia, which alter the gut microbiome and have been shown in scientific studies to negatively impact MMC function. So make sure that you're just looking at all the ingredients that you're using regularly in products you're using day to day, and try to avoid consumption of artificial sweeteners. The next way to support your body through this time is to work on stress and vagus nerve. Without parasympathetic activation, the MMC will not fully heal and recover. So if you do not enter the parasympathetic rest and digest state, the MMC is not going to recover. Plus, stress diverts energy and blood flow away from the digestive tract, which one doesn't have enough of with SIBO. So lower stress where you can in your life and prioritize an activity every single day that gets you into a parasympathetic state. And this specific activity will vary for everyone. Reading outside in the sun, breath work, journaling, drawing, grounding while watching the sunrise or sunset. Whatever you can do to get into a rest and digest state, do something like this every single day. Even 5 minutes will go a long way. I'm not saying you can't be in a stressed out state at other parts of the day, as part of life is dealing with stress, but we want to make sure that we're at least entering a parasympathetic state at least one time a day. This can also involve taking 5 to 10 deep breaths before each meal, a deep belly hum, to try to get into that parasympathetic state before eating. When it comes to vagus nerve support, here are some ways you can stimulate and improve vagal tone. Slow breathing, definitely avoid mouth breathing and heavy mouth breathing. Mindfulness and meditation, laughing, singing, gargling, frequent social connections, and actually laying on your right side while sleeping. Additional vagus nerve and stress supports, if you really need help with being in a really stressed out state, would include things like a vagus nerve stimulator, a program called HeartMath, and then additional apps to explore would be Nerva and Curable to really help your nervous system regulation, as that's going to be an important part of getting the MMC functioning again. Another SIBO support tool is to poop every single day. We have to ensure that we're pooping every day. This is a requirement, no exceptions, as SIBO and gut health will not heal without this. And as we've discussed in previous modules, our favorite bowel mover support is Cascara Sagrada, starting with 1/8 teaspoon at night before bed and slowly titrating up as needed, increasing by 1/8 teaspoon until you get a full bowel release daily. If your stools become loose, reduce total supplemented, and making sure that you are getting this daily poop every single day. The next tip would be to support lymph to open up drainage pathways. So, in addition to daily poops, we also want to encourage lymph drainage through occasional sweating and daily movement. So, here are my favorite 4 great lymph support tools. First, sauna sessions 1 to 2 times per week can really help release toxins through sweat. Second, probably the most important, daily movement with 8 to 10,000 steps per day can really help encourage the full body lymph drainage. Third, an additional support would be rebounding on a trampoline. Alternatively, if you don't have a trampoline, you can just do standing calf raises, and that's because the calf muscles play a major role in moving fluid from the lower body toward upwards for drainage. And the fourth tip would be Dr. Perry's 6-point lymph support routine, which you can find YouTube videos on by searching Dr. Perry 6-point lymph. That routine takes less than 5 minutes. The next SIBO support tool will be supporting the ileocecal valve. Again, those with SIBO commonly have a defective valve and low ileocecal valve pressure. And low pressure would then mean that the valve remains open. An impaired ileocecal valve is a risk factor for SIBO since it stays open for too long and microbes can migrate up from the large intestine into the small intestine. So you can occasionally perform ileocecal valve massages, and this can help reduce bloating and encourage motility. So locate the valve and any areas of tenderness in that area, and I have an image on the screen here to help you locate the valve. Then massage those areas in an upward, clockwise, circular motion for about 3 minutes with moderate firm pressure. Doing this between meals 2 to 3 times per day, 3 to 4 times per week can really help support digestion and proper valve function. So here's a little summary for SIBO physical support. So a daily routine you can do to help support better motility would be first, making sure that we're getting 8 to 10,000 steps a day. Just shoot for 8,000 steps a day minimum. 2 to 5 minutes of rebounding or standing calf raises. Dr. Perry's 6 points and an ileocecal valve massage in between meals. If you aren't perfect, that's okay. Just try to shoot for 4 to 5 days out of the week. Now let's transition to a few supplements that can be helpful to address SIBO. The first would be vitamin B1 support. So vitamin B1, thiamine, is needed as a cofactor for energy production for each step of the body's natural defense system to maintain appropriate levels of sterility and prevent overgrowths. Supplementation of vitamin B1 may be very advantageous along your gut healing journey, as the gastrointestinal tract is one of the main systems affected by a deficiency of thiamine. However, it does not work for everyone. According to research, about 2/3 of people experience great benefits from thiamine supplementation. In addition to sufficient ATP production systemically, vitamin B1 is necessary in the gut for a few main things. First, stomach acid secretion and gastric emptying. So, in the stomach, thiamine deficiency inhibits the release of hydrochloric acid from gastric cells and leads to low stomach acid. Due to its low pH, gastric acid is also a potent antimicrobial agent acting against acid sensitive microorganisms. Low stomach acid is considered a key risk factor for the development of bacterial overgrowth. The second thing would be pancreatic digestive enzyme secretion. In fact, the pancreas is one of the richest stores of thiamine in the body, so a thiamine deficiency can cause a major decrease in digestive enzyme secretion. The third would be intestinal brush border enzymes, which include sucrase, lactase, maltase, leucine, aminopeptidase, and alkaline phosphatase, all of which help you further break down food for pre-absorption. And the less food that we break down and the more food particles that we just let sit there, the more that'll support SIBO and overgrowths. And a thiamine deficiency was shown to reduce the activity of all of these enzymes by 42 to 66%. The next factor that vitamin B1 is involved in is intestinal contractions and motility, as thiamine is required coenzyme in glucose metabolism. And of course, proper motility and contractions require ATP. So the rate of gastric motility and emptying grinds down to a halt with low thiamine, producing delayed emptying, upper GI bloating, and a risk of fermentation and overgrowth in the wrong areas. And the final note here is vitamin B1 plays a role in vagal nerve function. So the primary neurotransmitter utilized by the vagus nerve is acetylcholine. Enteric neurons also use acetylcholine to initiate peristaltic contractions necessary for proper gut motility. While thiamine is necessary for the synthesis of acetylcholine, and low levels produce an acetylcholine deficit, which leads to reduced vagal tone and impaired motility in the stomach and small intestine. Now, what form of B1? Well, there's multiple different forms available in supplements. You can truthfully use any kind, but the TTFD form has the most research specifically to support gut improvements and motility. Now, this is not a must do supplement. And as I mentioned, not everyone will see the benefits. Something to try for a solid week and see if you notice any benefits. But if you do not see any noticeable improvements, you don't have to continue to take it. You can also try to increase your daily vitamin B1 intake through food and tracking that using Chronometer, which will show you if you've reached the RDA or not. Some of my favorite foods highest in B1 include pork, sourdough bread, acorn squash, and mussels. So let's cover probiotics for SIBO. Well, probiotics are a supplement that's hit or miss. But the goal of probiotics would be to populate the large intestine with good bacteria that will help us get more energy and nutrients from our food so that we can improve motility and metabolic rate. We want to avoid the case where the probiotics would add more bacteria and overgrowth in areas where we do not want them. On one hand, some studies show promising results of some probiotic strains possibly being effective in treating chronic diarrhea caused by bacterial overgrowth. A meta analysis summarizing 18 clinical trials concluded that probiotics are an effective treatment for SIBO. And one study found probiotics to be more effective than antibiotic treatment. Yet, on the flip side, there are other studies showing detrimental effects of probiotics. One study showed that probiotics may provoke SIBO symptoms like gas, bloating, and brain fogginess. And I really think that this is with people with very slow motility because you're adding more bacteria into a slow digestive system so that additional bacteria could feed on any food that is sitting in the digestive tract. Here's a quote from the literature. Quote, probiotic use can result in significant accumulation of bacteria in the small intestine that can result in disorienting brain fogginess as well as rapid, significant belly bloating, investigators report. So, some patients do not respond well to probiotics and actually have been found to respond better to antibiotics. And this discrepancy between all these different study results suggests that not all probiotics are of equal efficacy and should be used with caution in patients with SIBO. I mean, you are literally putting bacteria inside of you with slow motility, and this can cause overgrowth in areas that you don't want bacteria building up in. Taking a generic probiotic is definitely a hit or miss type of scenario. You have no idea if those specific strains are going to help you or not. And it's unclear just how many of those bacteria actually get left and pushed into the large intestine. So your quality, strain, type, and ingredients certainly matter. Plus, many commercial products contain tapioca starch, maltodextrin, sometimes soy, and other weird fillers. So don't just go randomly grabbing probiotics. Would honestly try the other tips mentioned in this section before diving into probiotics, but here are some of our favorite options for probiotics if you're going to experiment, trying one at a time. So the first would be Saccharomyces boulardii, and this is a single strain non-pathogenic probiotic yeast that has some antibiotic-like effects in getting rid of some of those parasitic organisms that may be in a SIBO gut. So this can help decrease hydrogen gas production and alleviate diarrhea without the risk of bacterial overgrowth. There are a number of studies documenting its efficacy in the treatment of GI conditions, especially when used as an adjunct to antibiotic treatment. Second would be phages. So phages are viruses that eat bacteria. So they are effective in eliminating pathogenic gut bacteria that can help improve intestinal dysbiosis. The third would be soil-based probiotics. These contain bacteria naturally found in our soil, which makes sense ancestrally as our ancestors were regularly exposed to healthy soil-growing and eating food. Soil-based probiotics have a natural seed-like structure that makes them hardier than standard lacto-based probiotics. As a result, they can survive the journey through the stomach without destruction and make it to the large intestine where they can help repopulate with beneficial bacteria. So the formation of endospores helps the probiotics withstand stomach acid, bile salts, and pancreatic enzymes that would normally destroy the bacteria. As a result, they do not colonize in the small intestine or feed the bacteria already growing there. So it wouldn't necessarily contribute to SIBO overgrowths or SIBO symptoms. So these bacteria have been shown to produce their own antibiotics, thus helping to reduce bacteria overgrowth. They essentially don't release their payload until they reach the colon, mitigating the risk of repopulating the small intestine with bacteria. In fact, a 2-week double-blind clinical study of patients with IBS demonstrated a significant reduction in symptoms when treated with a soil-based probiotic. So these specific types of probiotics are kind of all connected with the goal of reducing pathogenic while trying to repopulate with beneficial bacteria without contributing and increasing the amount of overgrowth in the small intestine. And I include links to specific products that you could try in the PDF resource module. However, do not try all of these at one time. Definitely try one at a time, gauging tolerance. And if they don't work, you don't have to continue to buy them. Now, on the exact opposite side is a discussion of antibiotics, which would attack the bacterial overgrowth head on and fairly quickly. Studies have shown a 91% success rate with SIBO eradication and a 94% improvement in symptoms. Here's a quote from Dr. AP, quote, all of the antibiotics are somewhat toxic to people, but at a certain level, they can suppress bacteria without noticeable toxicity for the person. So the goal is to establish a better internal ecosystem, end quote. However, we would highly advise against the use of antibiotics, especially at the start, as they can cause more harm than good. If you're going to use and are at wit ends and have tried everything else and you just want to try antibiotics, you should work directly with a practitioner, but definitely do not start there. While antibiotics can cause symptom relief and eradication of bacterial overgrowth has been shown to partially restore MMC activity, recurrence is high if antibiotics alone are used and the underlying root issue, low energy availability, was not addressed. Antibiotics alone will not fix gut motility disorders. They knock down the microorganism count. So they must be cautiously used in combination with preventative measures to address the root cause. But again, don't start here. All right, that wraps up these gut health modules. But I hope that it helps you understand that you don't have to go to extremes to fix your gut health. Instead, the focus should always be on improving metabolic rate and energy production, which is the whole goal of our course. You need adequate energy for the complex digestive system to function properly. And until that is resolved, there will be function loss.